Hi there, it's Nick with another episode of the Discover Bittensor podcast. And today I want to talk with you um, about cybersecurity and cybersecurity subnets on Bittensor, because I think that especially for newcomers to Bittensor, the subnets and this topic basically, the subnets that I'm going to talk about here make it really, really easy to understand the power of Bittensor. Okay, much easier than very technical inference subnets like shoots, for example. Think about what happened with the recent Mythos or Fable 5 model and the Anthropic CEO who had been basically warning the world that their new model would be so dangerous, so powerful that it might disrupt global digital infrastructure. And so they postponed the launch of their new model. Then they launched it, and after I believe one day, the US government basically forced them to shut it down because, well, we don't know exactly why, but um, now I believe it's back up again. Anthropic has been given permission, I believe, by the US government to put it back online again. But it's very interesting, as you will find out later in this episode, that there's a subnet on Bittensor called Bitsec, which basically beat the new Mythos model in terms of code vulnerabilities that is found in one of their clients' code base. This opens the question, what does it mean if open source AI agents are basically as good or better than the best and strongest AI model produced by a centralized lab? I want to talk about three subnets here, as I mentioned before: Bitsec, Yanez, and Redteam. And they all basically made some really interesting announcements recently, and I want to go over them as well. So let's start with Bitsec. Bitsec, or subnet 60, is easy to understand. Its purpose is to find and fix vulnerabilities in code. And it can be described as an ecosystem for AI-powered code vulnerability detection. It uses basically AI agents that miners submit, and they use these agents to basically go over the code of a client. And so, to make it very concrete, Yanez, the next cybersecurity subnet I'm going to talk about, they launched or they are in the process of launching an application that serves as a proof of human food. And Bitsec use their AI agents to go over the code, and they apparently found a critical vulnerability that the Yanez team hadn't found. And they also recently talked about this exciting announcement, which I already mentioned, that they used basically the AI agents the miners submitted to analyze a code base for clients. And they also let the Mythos model do this because they basically jailbreaked the Fable 5 model. And so they got access to the original Mythos model, if I understand correctly. Fable 5 reportedly found around 60 issues with the client's codebase, and Bitsec found more than 160 vulnerabilities, including 5 critical issues and 10 high severity issues that Fable 5 completely missed. This is really, really exciting, because at this moment the world thinks that the real danger comes from frontier centralized models like Fable or ChatGPT 5.6 or whatever the newest version is called. But the funny thing is, and I think the world really, really needs to wake up to this, is that open source AI agents, especially when improved rapidly thanks to, for example, Bittensor, which incentivizes people to basically improve open source software, can actually be as strong or stronger than decentralized models. And it's so funny for me to basically see how the world at this moment still thinks that open source is kind of a joke in terms of strength compared to these centralized labs. And I think we're going to be very surprised in the coming years to find out how strong, especially Bittensor, let's call them incentivized or improved AI agents and models can become. So yeah, that's Bitsec. And so you can imagine, for example, think about the recent Zcash exploit. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it, but Zcash is basically a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, but it's private. And they have what they call shielded pools. And this is basically a pool, like it can consist of several millions of Zcash coins, and it can be used for shielded transactions. But the funny thing is this: the engineers working on Zcash, they used Fable or Mythos model recently to basically go over the code, and they discovered that there was a critical vulnerability that had been around for at least, I believe, 3 or 4 years, and that basically allowed anyone to create new Zcash coins without anyone else noticing it. So in theory, if someone had discovered this, and it's very likely not the case, then they could have made millions of Zcash coins, removed them from the shielded pool, sold them all, and basically destroy Zcash. But very likely this is not the case, because it's the team behind Zcash that found it before any malicious actors found it. But this is an example of how important it is to check software. And of course, imagine you're a Chinese, I don't know, company, bank, whatever, and you are not going to rely exclusively on state-of-the-art American frontier model. You know, it's too much of a risk. So you might use Chinese models, but it's always good to have different models, not to use just one. What Bitsec basically does is it basically creates a swarm of AI agents that all might use different methods. I don't know exactly how this works technically, but it's basically like a swarm. Instead of just one model screening it, it can be a swarm of models. And yeah, you can imagine this is more powerful than a single model. So now let's move to the other subnet I want to talk about, Yanez, or subnet 54. It is cybersecurity in the more important modern sense, meaning identity, fraud, compliance, deepfakes, proof of humanhood, and agentic authorization. Basically, the idea is this. I believe 2025 or 2026 was or is the first year with more agents or bots using the internet than humans, something like this. I think I read this. Not sure, but I believe this is the case. And it's predicted, especially with all the new AI agents that arise everywhere, that in the future we are just going to be bombarded by all these AI agents and bots, and it's going to be much worse than it is today. And so it's really important, actually, for many different things to be able to figure out if you're dealing with a human or with an AI agent, or and if it's an AI agent, if it's controlled by a human. And think about, for example, banks. You need to control, for example, the identity of your client if there's a problem with his account, right? And there are many different initiatives trying to do this. Maybe some people heard of WorldCoin, which is backed by Sam Altman, and many people apparently really hate it. I believe this is because it's like some of the data or so is centralized, and so you basically depend on the team behind it. And so, what Yanez is trying to do is very different. They try to make an app, and I think they're in the process of releasing this application that basically uses different kinds of identification. So it can be facial recognition, maybe fingerprint, voice, many different things I think will be included. And it can be used on top of a password to basically verify the identity of someone for, I don't know, a bank. And what's very interesting is this. It can prove that the person the bank is dealing with is a human without providing all the important data of this person to the bank. So right now, for most people, their banks, they have access to their passport or other identity cards and more data. And the thing is, these data get hacked very often, and that's how identity fraud and other issues can arise. And this happens quite often, actually. And what's unique about this app is that the data basically don't leave the device, and it can still prove that the person trying to identify is indeed a real human being, and is person blah 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 linked to this account. So yeah, it basically tries to prove humanhood, and it delivers cryptographically verifiable, hardware agnostic, decentralized proof of humanhood and proof of uniqueness. And it emphasizes zero knowledge proofs, no biometric data leaving the device, and decentralized verification, which is fascinating. Because as AI agents become more capable, the internet will need a new trust layer. Who clicked this? Was it a real human? Was it a bot? Was it an AI agent? Was the agent authorized by a real human? Was this transaction delegated or forged? Was the identity duplicated? Is this person unique without forcing everyone through invasive KYC, which also has disadvantages and risks? As I mentioned before, because the data used for KYC can and is very often hacked, with big problems for the person in question. Now, the third team I want to talk about, to me, is also a very, very nice example of why Bittensor and cybersecurity firms are such a good combination. And it's called Redteam, which is subnet 61, and the enterprise behind it is called InnoWorks. What it does is basically the following. It lets red team actors, or how do we call this, like good hackers, turn specialized skills into legitimate rewards by solving real-world cybersecurity challenges. It's basically a decentralized platform where miners submit code solutions to technical challenges focused on security, and these solutions can then be integrated into real-world products to improve their security features. So the company behind the subnet basically protects different kind of apps and websites and whatnot. For example, they claim to have a client which is basically a messaging app with more than 100 million users. And so all these users basically are protected in part by the product that InnoWorks or Redteam develops, which is pretty cool. The team behind Redteam, they create challenges. And miners, they compete. They find bypasses. For example, they find a method to bypass a certain security measure or feature, or they build detectors, and the best work gets rewarded. And the company behind the product, InnoWorks, can integrate what's useful to improve the product. So the flywheel looks like this. Revenue comes from the security products that the team sells. A portion of the revenue buys the subnet alpha token. The higher alpha token value increases miner incentives. Better incentives attract better miners, and better miners improve security outputs, and better outputs improve the product. And the better product generates more revenue. And that's the subnet economy in one loop. I think many people, even within Bittensor, are completely missing the importance of cybersecurity, because a lot of people are looking for the next big AI category. They talk a lot about agents, inference, training, compute, which obviously are very important. But cybersecurity might be more naturally compatible with Bittensor than almost any of them, because cybersecurity already works like a market of adversarial intelligence. Attackers are decentralized. Attackers are creative. Attackers do not wait for your quarterly security review. And a traditional cybersecurity company has to hire that pressure internally. And Bittensor lets a subnet market source it. And that's the real superpower. So imagine Redteam. If they think about a competitor to them. They would need to continuously test their product to see if it's vulnerable, to see if it can be exploited, if it can be bypassed. And so they need to hire a big R&D department. They have to pay all these people, and it's expensive. And it's still 10, 20, 30, whatever people. Not so the company doesn't have access to a global network of hackers, basically. And that's what Bittensor offers. So it's like a free R&D department for this enterprise, which allows it to continuously battle test their product and make improvements if necessary. And in this way, they can stay ahead of competitors eternally. That's basically, very simply put, how it works. I think this is just one of the best examples to understand the power of Bittensor for newcomers. And by the way, for Yanez, I didn't mention this before, but what they do is this. They actually, a bit like Redteam, they have challenges and they have different incentives. For example, I believe one of the incentives was to create fake or synthetic identities, and then the team basically uses them to prevent people from bypassing their product. And it's basically the same concept like Redteam. They have access to this swarm of hackers or ethical hackers. That's the term I was looking for. Ethical hackers that basically continuously challenge the security of their product. They can make improvements so fast, it's unbeatable. Like competitors without access to great hackers, like global ethical hackers, like here these subnets, they are so far behind. And I don't see how they can keep up, to be honest. Because cybersecurity in the end is an endless adversarial game. And Bittensor is a protocol for incentivized adversarial competition. By the way, I do think that the entire cybersecurity stack on Bittensor is vastly undervalued. Yanez has real-world revenue, and Redteam as well. I have to say, it's not super transparent yet, but both of these subnets, they do definitely buy their token with their own money, with their revenue. So that's really encouraging to see. And what's crazy to me is that these subnets are all priced less than 0.006 tau. You have to understand the biggest subnet is like 10 times more, like its price is 10 times higher than these subnets. And there are tens and tens of subnets without any meaningful revenue or even a realistic path to revenue that are priced higher than these subnets, which sounds completely inaccurate to me. And well, time will tell, but I do think that these subnets are vastly underpriced. So not financial advice, but I do think it's worth paying attention to these subnets. And I do think, and I hope this has become clear to some of you, that those subnets are basically an amazing example of why Bittensor is so powerful, thanks to the fast iteration and the improvement of their product, thanks to this global network of ethical hackers or researchers, or however you want to call the miners in this example. So yeah, that's it for today. Check them out. They have Yanez and Redteam. They have a website. I do like the website of Yanez. I think it's still very early. They need to be much more transparent. They need to show, like this year, next year, to really increase their revenue, show some of their clients. And if they succeed, they really can have the potential, in my opinion, to become very successful companies. So yeah, let's see how this works out. If maybe in 1 year time, I unfortunately have to say that those subnets don't exist anymore, because I do want to remind everyone, subnets, even you can be very passionate about them, but it's so early that it's so high risk basically to invest in subnets for many different reasons. And as I said in previous episodes, most subnets will fail for whatever reason, and maybe those subnets will fail as well. I hope not, but we just don't know. And probably in like 5 or 10 years time, out of the 128 subnets that are on Bittensor today, only, I don't know, 10 or so, 15 maybe, or maybe even less, I don't know, but at least the vast minority will remain, and all these others will probably be replaced. And also, I think that many subnets we have today are going to be replaced by much stronger teams, much better incentive mechanisms, as the world is going to start to wake up to Bittensor. So let's say Bittensor in a few years reaches a few thousands of dollars in price, the Tau token. Well, at that point, it will attract so much more talent, because suddenly as a miner, you can earn much more, and it becomes so much more competitive. And that's why it's very important for the Tau token to really gain value. This is absolutely critical for many subnets to succeed, even for the biggest subnet right now, Shoots. This is a big issue, because their miners have to provide GPUs, and they have real hardware costs. So even though they receive, of course, the subnet token as emissions for their work, with a tau price of of $200 like it is right now, versus $2,000, this is a big difference, and it can and it will be the difference between being really profitable and being not profitable or hardly profitable. So yeah, that's why also the tau price needs to go up, and this is also why it's such an intriguing ecosystem, because basically every subnet is in direct competition with other subnets, but also somehow in a kind of mutual beneficial relationship. Because imagine Redteam is gonna become very successful, and their subnet price is gonna go up to 0.03 tau. They're gonna gain a lot of attention, and they're gonna attract a lot more eyes to Bittensor. Then suddenly, because of all this buy pressure on the subnet token, as people need to buy tau first to swap it for the subnet token, the price of tau might go up as well, as we've seen with Templar, which ended badly, but which definitely showed how this works. So yeah, I'm gonna stop it right here. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. You can find my contact information on my website, discoverbittensor.com.